Hello everyone, my name is Johan and I was asked to do this video for Poker VIP. And I've been playing PLO professionally for the last 6-7 years or so. And I play like mid stakes from 1-2 up to 10-20. And for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been a member of ProStaker. And this particular game we're gonna look at also includes 2 ProStaker members. So for that reason, since we know each other, it will probably bring some different dynamic than usual. And because of that, we're probably gonna make a few plays that we otherwise wouldn't have done or we shouldn't have done. So I think that should be an interesting game to look at and maybe to learn something from. In general, when we play three-handed here, my approach is pretty much the same as in 6-max. When we're on the button and it's folded to us in 6-max, we have the same scenario as here. We are up against the small and big blind. And my general approach on the button is to open pretty wide, like 65-70% as a standard. And depending on who's in the blinds, we can adjust some. If they overfold the big blind, for example, we're gonna probably open even wider. And if they defend and 3-bet a lot, we probably want to open a little bit tighter. Against these 2 players, I assume they play pretty standardly, so I would just use my general pre-flop approach here. And in the small blind, that means when we face some late position and when play three-handed, it's always the button open. We want to 3-bet a lot because we're up against a wide range to begin with, and in the small blind it's very important for us to isolate against the button. And by calling a lot in the small blind, we invite the big blind to call as well, which will lead to us being out of position against 2 players, which is not so great for the post-flop play. So we want 3-bet a lot in the small blind. In the big blind, we also want to 3-bet some, but mainly focus on defending our big blind as much as possible. Maybe fold around 25-30% and defend the rest. And in the big blind versus the small blind, when the button has folded pre-flop, we want to defend near 100%, I would say, and 3-bet probably around 20. So that's the approach that I had going into this session. I think I started recorded a little bit after we have played a little bit already. So here we are in the middle of the session, or at least not in the very beginning. So let's see what happens. So here on the right table we have a pretty weak hand that I think is maybe a hand we can fold pre-flop. It's somewhere in between. On the left table we open a pretty weak hand as well, and basically just give up on the flop here. We have nothing going on. And it's also this is also a board that favors the small blind range a lot. it would make a little bit more sense to see bet here with air against a big blind defend. But my assumption here is that small blind flatting is somewhere around 20%. And we can of course exclude like the top 10%, so which would have 3-bet. But still it's a board that favors this range. I think the speed is a little bit too high here. Okay, so here we choose to raise after small blind limp. I would say it's probably not necessary with this hand. It's not like we push an equity. It's the spot where we want to attack his limping range as much as possible, since we assume it's pretty weak. But we should probably choose a little stronger hand to raise with, even though we are in position in a heads up pot. And on the left table it's not so interesting. We got 3-bet and we 4-bet, and now we choose a size of, let's say, 1/3 pot. I don't think it matters too much here. You could make a case for just potting it, since it's a spot where if he has something he will go with it, and if it doesn't, I don't think betting small makes him shove a hand that wouldn't have called. And the argument for betting small is that we could get cheaper. We could bluff cheaper with hands like middle rundowns that we choose to 4-bet with, and we can actually fold when he shoves. But those situations are pretty rare, so I don't think it matters too much. Yeah, okay, so on the right table here we open the small blind versus big blind. Very standard c-bet, I would say. It's a board that favors us if we open around 30-35%. At least that's what I do in the small blind, and then I limp like 30-35% as well and fold the rest. So since he'll probably 3-bet a lot in the big blind versus small blind, so if he 3-bets, let's say, the top 15% of hands, and defend near 100%, this is definitely a board that favors us. So we want c-bet. On the turn, I think we need to bet again, mainly because we want to protect against flush draws and straight draws, and I expect that we have the best hand on turn almost always. Ace king, most of his ace king combos would have 3-bet pre, I think, and we blocked the 9, so the only set he can have is like 6-6. On the river, I'm not too sure he would value bet all his flushes here, so I think going for value is better than go for check raise. And on the left table we defend versus button, we flop air. We have we have some backdoor draws, actually a lot of backdoor draws with this hand. I need 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, and diamonds will give us something. And it's a board that the button usually see bet a lot, which means now we check back. But if we had c bet here, I think this is actually a pretty good candidate to check raise bluff with, since we can pick up so much equity in a lot of turns. Now when you check back and the turn is 4, giving us a pair and open ender, I think we have a pretty clear bet. Standard open on the right table. We flop top pair with nothing else. Pretty draw heavy board, so I think since it's a board that doesn't really favor the big blind, we can see the tear, mostly for protection. Turn a blank, and on left table we open on the button and flop a weak flusher. I think checking back here is probably my standard, even though c betting is fine. Now he leads into us on the right table, which is kind of a weird line that you don't see too often. I would say most players tend to lead the turns when you change the board, but going check call on the flop and then lead blank turns isn't the play you see that often, even though I personally think it could be a very good line, especially the kind of hands you want to do it with is mostly hands that doesn't really want to check raise the flop with. So let's say he has queen deuce here on the flop with nothing else. It's not really a hand you can check raise for value, and so you're gonna check call every time on the flop, and on the turn it's a hand that now we can go for value with only one street to come, and we also want to have protection against lots of hands. So with a hand like queen deuce or queen 5, I think it makes a lot of sense to donk, since we're gonna see bet with a really high frequency on this board, and when we get called we will have lots of just one pair, just 10x or some naked flush draws or some 8-9 jack, lots of hands we can just check back turn with and take our free card. So from his point of view, getting one bet in against those hands is it's a good play, I think. And with top pair, considering his range, it might be a hand we actually can fold versus a donk if we assume he's leading with lots of 2-pair combos, or occasionally some stronger hands like 10-10, or he can do it with both some strong draws and some weaker draws as well. But against this whole range, I don't think our hand does very well. So we can probably just fold the turn. And he had queen deuce, and we sucked out. And the hand on the left table, we choose to see but the flop, which I don't think is it's a board that just connects with too many combos for this to be a profitable c-bet, I think. We have some equity, so checking back would definitely be my standard. On the turn, I just give up basically. It's not a hand we want to barrel with. We don't block anything except for the flush draw, which is kind of bad to block. Here we defend big blind, flop top 2. Flop goes check check, and we bet turn. Very standard, he calls. Interesting on the river. I think we're pretty high up in our range. We block 1 spade. We also block a 3, which I think is pretty relevant here. We block some ace 3 combos and 3-6 combos. So I think versus a half pot bet, we just have to call here. On the left table, we 3-bet pre-flop in the big blind versus button, and on the flop it goes check check. This is definitely a board we can see bet as the 3-better, but when we have the flush draw to go with our overpair, it's not like we gain too much by betting. We can still get some bet in versus king king jack jack on later streets. Excuse me. And we can also give him the opportunity to take a stab when he checks. So checking is fine. And when he doesn't bet the flop, I think on the turn we just have to go for some value. Standard 3-bet on left table, and we defend the big blind. No, sorry, we limp the small blind on the left here, on the right table. And here we check the flop, which I don't like. Since we limp the small blind and the big blind choose not to raise, I would say this board definitely favors us. We will have lots of weaker ace x combos in our limping range. We also have something going on here with 2 gut shot draws, and we also have a queen diamond blockers. So this is a situation where I just think we should barrel a lot and attack his range on this board especially. On the left we 3-bet and we c-bet, very standard. Here I think we should c-bet with a pretty large size, since it's a board where it doesn't really favor our range very much, but we will have lots of hands that need a lot of protection here. We will have lots of ace king king, of course, sometimes with a flush draw, and we will have some queen x with a flush draw, or just queen x as here. And now we choose to make a delay bet on turn, and got raised, which is a bit weird, but this time we didn't really have a hand that we could defend with. We could make an argument for calling his raise here and lead all diamonds as well as 4s and 10s. So it's actually fine to call here. Here we open in a small blind, easy C bet. Not the best river. Would say the problem the problem here is that if he bets, um, he has pretty hard time repping any bluffs. Since with block ace 3, um, the the only straight draw on the flop hit on the turn, and then the flush hit on the river. So those hands in his range that isn't a flush or straight probably has enough showdown value to check back the river. If he the hands he could choose to turn into bluffs are pretty much ace X with which aren't two pairs, so ace, I don't know, ace 9 10 5 or something with no flush could bluff, but otherwise his range here when he bets should be too strong for us to be here calling, even though we block we have a relevant blocker with the queen of clubs. But I think folding there is correct. Yeah, so on left table we defend in the big blind. Definitely a board that we can have a leading range on. It's not a board that I think these boards, even though they are good for a big blind defend range, they are also good for a button open range. So I think it's far more profitable to lead here if we play 6 max and we are up against early position open on the gun or MP or cutoff. Because when we're up against a much tighter range, it makes more sense for us to lead these boards since we have a range advantage on these boards versus tight range. But now against the button, that's not really the case. So here we have pretty even range situations where he probably opens around 70% and we defend perhaps 70% as well. So that means we can't lead these boards as often, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't lead them at all. So this hand is very good to lead with, since we don't have any showdown value at this point. We have a decent draw. We block the 7. So here we open a weak hand and just give up on this board, which I think is fine. And here we make kind of a weird play when we, let me see what happened. I think we 4-bet cold with this hand. This hand is definitely too weak to do that with, even though we have fine equity against anything, but the problem here is that when we just play 100 BB, you really have to 4-bet more for value than for deception, and I would say this 4-bet could be okay if we play deeper, since deception becomes more relevant then. But now I just think it's too loose. And same thing here. This is not the hand I would have in my 3-bet range. Okay, so here's also a very loose play. Small blind opening, and we choose to 3-bet with 5, 8, 10 jack rainbow, which I don't like. We will have far better hands to 3-bet with, and when we have a rainbow hand like this, we shouldn't be doing it. On this board, betting small definitely is fine. We have top pair, we block 1 diamond, and we have we have a gut shot as well. So betting small just to fold out 1 pair of hands basically. Now it calls and we pick up 2 pair. Now we have enough showdown value, in my opinion, that we don't need to barrel. And this is also a line we can take with some of our flushes, where we bet small on the flop and check back turn to induce him to bluff river. So with, let's say, if we had a jack high flush here, we could use that as a bluff catcher, or we could choose to value bet the river if he checks again. Now we just take it showdown and we split. Yeah, I think that's it for now. I'll do a few more of these videos later. So thanks for watching. Bye.